He didn't duck. He didn't freeze. Dante Wallace sprinted straight into the gunfire. Not because he was trained to, not because someone ordered him to, but because a woman was bleeding out on the pavement and nobody else was moving. In 30 seconds, one decision would cost him everything he'd spent 10 years building: his freedom, his reputation, and nearly his life. But here's the part nobody saw coming: the woman he saved. She wasn't just anyone, and what she knew was going to tear Boston apart. Stay with me until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The gunshot didn't sound like the movies. It never does. It wasn't a sharp crack. It wasn't dramatic. It was a flat, ugly pop. The kind of sound that your brain tries to rewrite as a car backfiring, as a dumpster lid slamming, as anything other than what it actually is. Because if your brain admits what it really is, then everything changes. Everything after that moment is different. Dante Wallace heard it and knew immediately. He'd spent 8 years as a Navy SEAL. He'd heard that sound in Fallujah. He'd heard it in the mountains outside Kandahar. He'd heard it at 3 a.m. in a narrow street in Mosul when the air smelled like diesel and burning copper. His body didn't wait for his mind to catch up. He was already moving before the second shot came. It had been an ordinary Saturday afternoon in October, the kind Boston does better than almost any other city in America. The sky was that deep, sharp blue that only shows up in the fall, and the trees along Tremont Street had gone full gold and rust. Dante had Lily on one side of him and Max on the other, his 9-year-old daughter holding his hand and swinging it with the particular kind of easy joy that kids do when the weekend belongs entirely to them, and his German shepherd padding along with that quiet, regal dignity that Max had carried since he was a puppy. Lily had been talking for the better part of 20 minutes without stopping. And Mrs. Peterson said I had the best project in the whole class. Not just my row, the whole class. Dad and Marcus said that wasn't fair because his volcano actually exploded, but mine didn't explode. And Mrs. Peterson said that was the point, because the assignment was about geological stability, and Marcus's, Lily. Volcano was technically a failure, even though it was cooler, and I said, Lily. That cooler doesn't mean better. And Marcus said, Lily, breathe. She looked up at him with her mother's eyes, that impossible shade of brown that shifted to amber in direct sunlight, and grinned. I'm breathing and talking, Dad. It's called multitasking. Dante laughed. It came out low and genuine, the kind of laugh that loosened something in his chest that had been tight for a long time. Your teacher actually said best in the whole class. She showed it to Mr. Delgado in the hallway. That's my girl. Max pressed briefly against Dante's leg as they turned the corner off Tremont toward the old Haymarket parking area, a habit the dog had developed years ago, a gentle, steady contact, like he was checking in. Dante reached down and touched the back of Max's neck without thinking. They'd developed a language like that, the two of them. No words required. He heard the first shot at 2:17 p.m. The world didn't stop. That's the thing people always get wrong about violence. They think time slows down the way it does in films, but it doesn't. Time accelerates. Everything crashes into everything else with terrifying speed, and you are always behind it. Screaming broke in from the left, raw, chaotic, the sound of a crowd that had gone from ordinary to terrified in a single heartbeat. People came running around the corner in a mass jackets, flying phones, dropping someone's coffee spinning through the air in a long brown arc. A man in a Red Sox jersey hit Dante's shoulder hard enough to spin him half around. A woman in heels tripped and went down on one knee on the curb, and nobody stopped to help her. They were all just running, pushing, getting away from whatever was on the other side of that corner. Dante's hand found Lily before he consciously decided to move. He pulled her against him, turning so his body was between her and the street, one arm wrapped tight around her shoulders. She made a small sound, not quite a scream, more like a gasp that got swallowed. Max moved with them instantly, positioning himself on Lily's other side, ears up, every muscle in his body suddenly wire tight. Dad? "I've got you." His voice came out flat and even, controlled. He'd trained for this, not for this exact moment, but for the discipline of voice when everything else was breaking apart. Calm voice, always the calm voice. "Don't look at the street, look at me." She looked at him. Her eyes were wide, and her lower lip was trembling, but she was looking at him, and that was everything. "There's a doorway right behind you," he said. "Green door 10 feet back. You're going to walk backward, and Max is going to go with you, and you're going to press yourself into that doorway and stay there. Do you understand me? What about you? Lily." He kept his voice low, kept it level. "Do you understand me?" She swallowed hard, nodded once. "Tell me back. Green door. Backward. Stay with Max. Don't move. Good girl." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, fast, fierce, the way you kiss someone when time is running out. "Go. Now." She went. Max went with her, not because Dante commanded it, but because the dog had made his own assessment of the situation and knew exactly where he was needed. Dante watched for 2 seconds to make sure they reached the doorway, saw Lily press herself flat against the green-painted wood with Max's bulk solid in front of her, and then he turned toward the corner. He moved fast. What he found on the other side of that corner stopped him for a fraction of a second, not from fear, but from the speed of calculation, the old SEAL habit of reading a scene in the first 2 heartbeats before committing to an action. The parking lot was an open slab of cracked asphalt bordered by chain-link fence on 2 sides. There was a black SUV stopped at a strange angle near the far entrance, both front doors hanging open. There were 2 men running north along the fence. Dante clocked them, immediately noted their speed. Noted they were moving away. There was a 3rd man down on one knee, behind a concrete barrier near the street, and he had a gun up, and he was still looking for a target. And there was a woman on the ground. She was maybe 30 yards from him, lying on her side near the front of a parked car. Dark blazer, dark hair. One hand was pressed against her left shoulder, and the pavement around her was wet and dark. She was alive. He could see her moving small, effortful movements, the way people move when they're fighting to stay conscious through pain. He was moving before he'd finished the thought. The man with the gun saw him at the same time. Dante saw the barrel swing his direction, and he dropped low and hard to his right, landing on one shoulder, and rolling, coming up behind the hood of a parked Honda. 2 shots hit the car. He felt the impact through the metal. The 3rd shot went wide. Then the man ran. Dante didn't go after him. That wasn't the priority. He came up low and fast, keeping cars between himself and the open lot, covering the 30 yards to the woman in under 10 seconds. He went down on one knee beside her, his hands already moving to assess. "Hey." He kept his voice firm, close to her ear. "Hey, stay with me. I've got you. I'm going to help you." She turned her head. Her face was pale, almost gray under the October light, and her eyes were glassy with shock and pain. But she was there. She was conscious she was tracking him. That was something. That was everything. "I can't." Her voice came out thin and fractured. "I can't feel my arm." "That's normal. That's okay. Your arm is going to be fine." He was already pulling off his jacket, already tearing at the inner lining with both hands. "The bullet hit your shoulder." "It went through. That's actually good news. I know it doesn't feel like it." "What's your name?" She blinked at him, blinked again, like she was trying to remember. "Your name," he repeated, firm but not harsh. "Tell me your name. It helps." "Grace." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Grace Chen." "Grace. My name is Dante. I'm going to pack this wound, and it's going to hurt, and you're going to let me because you want to live. Can you do that?" For a moment, she just looked at him. There was something strange in her expression, something beyond the shock and the pain, something that looked almost like recognition, like she was deciding something. Then she said, "Do what you need to do." He did. He used his jacket lining as a compression bandage, a skill he'd practiced until it was reflex, packing the entry and exit wounds tight and firm, maintaining pressure with one hand while he stripped off his outer flannel and tied it around her shoulder to hold the packing in place. She made a sound through her teeth that wasn't quite a scream, but cost her something to keep inside. He talked through all of it low, steady, constant, not reassuring platitudes, just information. Because in his experience, people in shock respond better to facts than to comfort. The packing is in place. You're bleeding slower now. The ambulance will be here in under 8 minutes. Someone's already called. I can hear the sirens. You are not going to die today, Grace. That is a fact. You don't know that, she said through her teeth. I've seen people with wounds 3 times worse than this survive. He held pressure steady, his eyes moving constantly around the lot. And you're still arguing with me, which means your brain is working fine. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile, too much pain for a smile, but something in the neighborhood. Who are you? She asked. Dante Wallace. Former Navy SEAL, current single father, occasional inconvenience to people who point guns at innocent women. He kept scanning the lot. How many shooters did you see? She hesitated. Grace. How many? 3. Her voice dropped. At least 3. Maybe 4. You know them? Another hesitation. Longer this time. He felt it in the silence the same way he'd once felt tripwires, that subtle tension, that sense of something loaded and dangerous just beneath the surface of an ordinary moment. No, she said. He looked at her directly, held the look long enough that she knew he'd registered the pause. Okay, he said, and left it there. The sirens were getting closer. The first police cruiser came in fast tires, screaming on the entrance ramp, and Dante kept his hands visible. He knew what this looked like. He had been in enough situations to understand exactly what a uniformed officer sees when he rolls up on an active shooting scene and finds a large black man kneeling over a wounded woman on the ground. He knew what that picture could become in the space of 3 seconds. Hands! Let me see your hands! Dante spread both hands wide, keeping pressure on Grace's shoulder with his palm. I'm holding a compression bandage on her shoulder wound. If I remove my hands, she may bleed out. I am not armed. My name is Dante Wallace. I'm a former Navy SEAL and I was rendering first aid. Get away from her. Get away from her, right now. Officer, if I remove pressure, I will not say it again. Move away from the woman. Dante looked down at Grace. Her eyes were open, focused on him, and there was something in them, urgency or maybe apology. He couldn't read it clearly. He looked back up at the officer, a young guy, maybe 25, face tight with adrenaline and fear service weapon up. I'm going to maintain compression until EMS arrives, Dante said, keeping his voice completely flat. I will cooperate with every instruction after that. But I am not removing my hands from this wound. Sir, she will bleed out. He said it without heat, like a fact. You don't want that. I don't want that. So let the paramedics get here, and then I will do whatever you tell me. For 4 of the longest seconds of Dante's life, the officer didn't move. Then a second cruiser came in, and a third, and suddenly the lot was full of blue and red light and shouting voices and the crackle of radios, and 2 EMTs were running toward him with a kit and a stretcher, and Dante finally carefully moved aside. The moment he stood up, 3 officers were on him. They put him in the back of a cruiser. He didn't fight it. He knew how this worked, knew it in his bones, knew it from 8 years of following procedures in situations where procedure was the only thing standing between order and chaos. He let them check him for weapons, let them run his ID, sat in the back of the cruiser with his wrists flex-cuffed in front of him, and watched through the window as the EMTs worked on Grace Chen with the focused, urgent efficiency of people who do this for a living. She was alive. He could see that from here. One of the EMTs had her on the stretcher, the other was working the IV. Her head was turned toward him, or toward the cruiser at least, and he thought from this distance that her eyes were open. His phone was in his jacket, and his jacket was currently a blood-soaked compression bandage on a woman's shoulder. So he had no way to call Lily. That was the thing that sat in his chest like a stone. Not the handcuffs. Not the 3 officers outside the cruiser, currently debating what to do with him in voices low enough that he couldn't catch words. Not even the question of what came next. Just Lily pressed into that green doorway with Max waiting for him to come back. I told her I'd come back. He breathed out slowly. Then he closed his eyes for exactly 10 seconds. An old trick, a SEAL trick, the kind of thing you do when the situation is beyond your immediate control, and the only asset you have left is your own nervous system. 10 seconds. Let the body settle. Let the adrenaline metabolize. Come back. He opened his eyes. The young officer who'd first drawn on him was standing outside the cruiser window, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd holstered his weapon, but he was holding himself the way men hold themselves when they're not sure they made the right call and don't want anyone to notice. Dante had seen that posture before. He understood it. He wasn't angry about it. He didn't have the luxury of anger right now. The cruiser door opened. A different officer, older, heavier Sergeant Stripes, leaned in. He had the face of a man who had seen too much to be easily surprised, but there was something careful in his eyes. Assessing. "Mr. Wallace." "Sergeant." "You want to tell me what happened here?" Dante told him. All of it. Clean, linear, no embellishment, the way he'd learned to debrief: start at the moment of first contact, move forward in sequence, state only what you directly observed. He didn't editorialize. He didn't explain his choices. He stated facts. The sergeant listened without interrupting. When Dante finished, the sergeant was quiet for a moment. Then, "You said she told you there were 3 shooters, maybe 4. "That's correct." "She say anything else?" Dante looked at him steadily. "She said she didn't know them." The sergeant's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, small, quick, gone. Like a door opening and closing in the same breath. "Right," the sergeant said. "We're going to need you to come in and make a full statement." "I understand." Dante kept his voice level. "My daughter is approximately 100 yards from here in the doorway of a business on the south side of the block with my dog. Before I do anything else, I need someone to bring her to me." The sergeant looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "What's she look like?" 9 years old. Brown jacket. Braids. German shepherd named Max. He won't bite unless she's threatened." Dante paused. "She's scared." Something moved in the sergeant's face. Something human. "I'll send someone now," he said. They brought Lily to him 7 minutes later. She came across the parking lot with one of the female officers holding Max's leash in both hands. And when she saw the cruiser, when she saw Dante sitting in the back, her face did something complicated and devastating. She stopped walking for a moment. Just stopped. Then she came the rest of the way at a dead run. "Lily." "Dad." She hit the door before the officer could open it. "Dad, I heard more shots." "I stayed where you said, but I heard more shots and you didn't come back and Max was growling and I thought—" Her voice broke. Rebuilt. "I thought something happened to you." "I'm right here." The officer opened the door and Dante leaned out and Lily pressed her face against his chest, and he wrapped both flex-cuffed hands around her as best he could and held her. "I'm right here. I'm okay." "Why are you handcuffed?" "Because I was at a crime scene and they don't know me yet." He said it simply without drama. "It's a precaution. It's standard. They're going to ask me some questions, and then it'll be sorted out." She pulled back and looked at him with those amber brown eyes. 9 years old and already reading him the way his own mother used to, looking for the thing underneath the thing, checking for what wasn't being said. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." "Your shirt has blood on it." "It's not mine." "Dad." He met her eyes, held them. "I promise you. Not mine." She searched his face for another moment. Then slowly, she leaned back against him, and he felt some of the tension go out of her small body. Max pressed his nose against Dante's knee through the door. From across the lot, a paramedic looked up from Grace Chen's stretcher, said something to her colleague, and for a moment, Grace's eyes found the cruiser. Found Dante. She held his gaze across 30 yards of crime scene for 3-4-5 seconds. Then they loaded her into the ambulance. And Dante Wallace, sitting in the back of a Boston police cruiser, with his handcuffed arms around his daughter and his dog's nose warm against his leg, allowed himself to think for the first time since he'd heard that first flat, ugly gunshot that whatever came next was going to be complicated. He had no idea how right he was. The interrogation room smelled like burnt coffee and old regret. Dante had been in worse places. He'd sat in concrete bunkers in 110-degree heat with sand in his teeth and the sound of mortars walking closer. He'd spent 14 hours in a holding cell in Bahrain, once waiting for command to sort out a jurisdictional nightmare that wasn't his fault and wasn't his problem, but somehow became both. He knew how to wait. He knew how to be still while the world moved around him without his permission. But he had never sat in a room like this, with Lily's voice still echoing in his chest. They'd taken her to a family services area down the hall, a small room with a couch and a box of crayons, and a uniformed officer named Reyes, who had a kind face and had promised Lily there was hot chocolate somewhere in the building. Dante had watched Lily follow her Max's leash, wrapped twice around her small fist, and he'd kept his face neutral all the way through it. Kept it neutral right up until the door closed between them. Then he'd sat down across from Detective Aaron Briggs and folded his hands on the table and waited. Briggs was maybe 45, with the kind of face that had probably been open and readable once and had since been closed down and reinforced the way you board up windows before a storm. He had a legal pad, a pen he kept clicking, and the particular stillness of a man who was very good at his job and wanted you to know it without saying so. Mr. Wallace, he set the pen down. Walk me through it again. I've walked through it twice. And now you're going to walk through it a third time. Briggs said it without apology, without heat. Just a fact. From the moment you turned the corner. Dante looked at him. Briggs looked back. Neither of them blinked for a long moment. Then Dante walked through it a third time. He kept it identical. Same sequence, same language, same details, same pauses. Because the truth doesn't change on the third telling, and anyone who's ever been interrogated knows that the moment your story starts shifting, even in small ways, even in the direction of more detail, it starts looking like construction. He'd learned that lesson a long time ago from a master chief who told him, "Kid, the truth is boring. That's how you know it's the truth." Briggs listened. He wrote some things down. He clicked the pen. When Dante finished, Briggs said, "You said Grace Chen told you she didn't recognize the shooters." "That's correct." "But you hesitated before you confirmed that just now." Dante met his eyes. "I didn't hesitate." There was a pause. I was recalling the exact exchange. There's a difference between a pause and a hesitation. Briggs studied him. "You believe her? That she didn't know them?" Dante kept his face still. "I administered first aid to a woman who'd been shot. I'm not her biographer." "You noticed the pause, though." Briggs leaned forward slightly. When she answered, "You noticed it." "I notice things. It's a habit." "From the SEALs." "From the SEALs." Briggs tapped the pen against the legal pad twice. 8 years active duty. 2 deployments to Iraq, 1 to Afghanistan, 1 classified. Honorable discharge 2018. He looked up. "What did you do after you got out?" "Construction project management. I have a small company. Residential renovation mostly." "You like it?" The question was casual. Almost too casual. The kind of casual that's actually a pressure test. An attempt to shift the register of the conversation and see what comes loose. Dante recognized it and didn't mind it. "I like being home for my daughter," he said. "I like knowing where I'm going to sleep." Something moved briefly in Briggs's expression. Not sympathy exactly, more like recognition. How long has it been since her mother? 4 years. Dante kept his voice even. And I'd appreciate staying on the subject of what happened in that parking lot. Briggs nodded slowly. Put the pen down again. Then he said, Grace Chen is the CEO of Chen Capital Group, private equity major real estate holdings government contracts. She's also been cooperating quietly off the record with a federal task force investigating allegations of collusion between city contractors and organized crime. He paused. We think what happened today was not random. Dante didn't say anything. Which means you, Mr. Wallace, happened to be standing in the wrong place at a very complicated time. Briggs folded his hands. And now you're sitting across from me, and you have information, and I need to know how much of it you actually understood while it was happening. I understood a woman was bleeding, Dante said. I understood nobody else was moving. I understood I had the training to help her. That's it. That's what mattered. Briggs looked at him for a long time. Long enough that Dante could hear the ventilation system cycling overhead, could hear a phone ringing somewhere down the hallway, could hear the distant sound of Lily's voice, or thought he could, though it was probably just his mind manufacturing comfort. All right, Briggs said finally. He stood up. Sit tight. My daughter, Officer Reyes has her. She's fine. He was already moving toward the door. I'm going to check on something. Don't go anywhere. Dante looked around the small empty room. Sure, he said. He sat alone for 41 minutes. He knew it was 41 because there was a clock on the wall, institutional black-rimmed, the kind that makes a small sound on every second, and he'd clocked in at 4:23 when Briggs left. When the door opened again, it was 5:04, and it wasn't Briggs. It was a woman in a gray suit. Late 30s, sharp eyes carrying a leather portfolio that she set on the table with a precise, deliberate movement that told Dante she was either a lawyer or had been trained by one. She sat down across from him, opened the portfolio, looked up. Mr. Wallace, my name is Agent Diana Marsh, FBI. I'm going to need about 20 minutes of your time. Dante looked at her steadily. Am I under arrest? No. Am I being detained? No. Then I'd like to know where my daughter is before we have any further conversation. Marsh studied him briefly, then reached for the phone on the wall, said 3 words to whoever answered, waited, and then turned the phone toward Dante. Dad? Lily's voice came through thin and a little wobbly, but present. Whole. Hey, baby girl. He kept his voice soft, steady, the same voice he used at 2 a.m. when she had nightmares, the voice that was supposed to sound like the ground was still there. You okay? I'm okay. Officer Reyes got me hot chocolate. Max is being really good. A pause. Dad, how much longer? Not long, I promise. He meant it as a fact, not a reassurance. He'd learned the difference mattered to her. You're doing great. I love you. I love you too. He handed the phone back to Marsh. She replaced it and looked at him with an expression that wasn't quite warmth, but wasn't nothing either. She seems like a good kid, Marsh said. She's the best person I know, Dante said. 20 minutes. Start talking. What Marsh told him in the next 20 minutes rearranged several things Dante had assumed about his afternoon. Grace Chen, she said, had been in contact with the FBI for the past 6 weeks. She'd come to them voluntarily, had walked into the Boston field office on a Tuesday morning in late August, with a USB drive and a lawyer and a statement that she believed her life was in danger. The drive contained financial records, communication logs, and 2 years' worth of documentation, suggesting that a network of city contractors, several of them with direct ties to a crew operating out of South Boston, had been systematically bribing their way through municipal contracts, using a shell structure that ran in part through real estate investment vehicles that Grace's company had unknowingly been used to legitimize. She hadn't known. That was her claim, and Marsh said the FBI believed her because the documentation she'd handed over was the kind of thing you don't surrender if you're protecting yourself. You only give that up if you're genuinely scared and you've decided that cooperation is the only exit. She'd been receiving threats for 3 weeks, Marsh said. Phone calls. A dead animal left outside her office. Last Thursday, someone broke into her car. And today someone shot her, Dante said. Yes. So your witness protection was working well? Marsh's jaw tightened slightly. We had reason to believe the threat level was being managed. We were wrong. Dante looked at her. Who else knew she was cooperating? That is the question we are currently very interested in, Marsh said, and her voice had an edge that she was working to keep controlled. Because her cooperation was known to 4 people inside this building, this police building, in addition to our task force. The room was very quiet. You think the leak is in the department? Dante said. I think it's possible. She looked at him directly. Which is why what you just told Detective Briggs is going to be reviewed very carefully by people above Briggs's pay grade, and why I'm sitting here instead of him. Dante turned this over, turned it over again. The parking lot, the black SUV, the 3 running figures, the man with the gun who'd taken 2 shots at him and then run, not pushed the advantage, not tried to finish the job, just ran. That wasn't the behavior of a professional. Or it was the behavior of a professional who'd been told the job was already done and was now running because the variables had changed. The shooter who aimed at me, he said. He had the shot. I was exposed for at least 2 seconds. He didn't take it. Marsh looked at him carefully. What's your read on that? He was there for grace. I was a complication. He ran because he didn't know what I was. Whether I was law enforcement, whether I had backup, whether staying would cost him more than leaving. He paused. Which means he's cautious, disciplined enough to cut losses. Which means he'll try again, Marsh said. Yes. They looked at each other across the table. Mr. Wallace, she said, how much do you know about what you walked into today? Apparently considerably less than you, he said, and considerably more than I'd like. They released him at 6:15 p.m. Not cleared, not closed. Released pending further cooperation with Marsh's card in his pocket, and Briggs's card in his other pocket, and the understanding spoken and unspoken that he was to go nowhere interesting and call them if he remembered anything, heard anything, or had any reason to believe that the events of this afternoon had followed him home. He found Lily in the family services room, asleep on the couch, with her head on Max's flank and a half-empty cup of cold hot chocolate on the table beside her. Officer Reyes was sitting across from her on her phone, and she looked up when Dante came in with the specific expression of someone who has been holding the fort and is quietly relieved that the cavalry has arrived. She went down about 40 minutes ago, Reyes said softly. She fought it hard, kept asking me questions about police procedure. That's her. Dante crouched beside the couch, put his hand on Lily's shoulder gently. Hey. Hey, Lilybug. She came awake the way she always did all at once, eyes open, immediately present. She sat up, looked at him, and for a moment her face did that devastating thing again, relief breaking open over all the worry she'd been holding underneath it. Then she threw her arms around his neck and didn't say anything, just held on. He held her back, closed his eyes, pressed his face against the top of her head. Max lifted his head and rested his chin on Dante's knee. Okay, Lily said, finally pulling back and rubbing at her eyes with the heels of her hands in the businesslike way she had, the way that always reminded him of her mother. Okay, can we go home now? Yeah, baby, we can go home. Are you going to tell me what actually happened? Most of it. How much is most? More than nothing, less than everything. She considered this with the gravity of a 9-year-old conducting a negotiation. Is the woman okay? The one you helped. Dante stood up, took her hand. She's at the hospital. They think she's going to be fine. Good. Lily picked up Max's leash. Then, without looking up, she said quietly, "I was really scared, Dad." "I know. I kept thinking, what if you didn't come back? What would I—" She stopped, swallowed. "I'm not supposed to think like that." He stopped walking, turned to face her, crouched down to her level, and waited until she looked at him. "You're allowed to think like that," he said. "That fear is real and it makes sense. But here's what's also real: I came back. I always come back. And when I can't—" He held her eyes. "You're not alone. You've never been alone. You understand." She searched his face, nodded once, slow and serious. "Now let's go home," he said. "I'm going to order that terrible pizza you like." "It's not terrible. The crust tastes like cardboard with ambition." "It's artisanal." "It's cardboard with ambition," he repeated, and she laughed, and the sound of it opened something in his chest that had been clamped shut since 2:17 that afternoon. He didn't sleep. He put Lily to bed and he sat with her until she was under, which took longer than usual, because her mind kept spinning back to the parking lot in ways she tried to disguise as questions about other things. She asked him if he thought it was going to rain tomorrow. She asked him if he'd remembered to buy more of the dog food Max liked. She asked him in a very small voice if he thought scared people could still be brave people. He told her yes. He told her that scared people were usually the bravest people, because brave people who weren't scared didn't understand the stakes. She thought about that for a while. Then she slept. He went to the kitchen, poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon he didn't drink, and sat at the table in the dark with his hands flat on the wood, and thought about Grace Chen. About the pause. Because Briggs had been right. There had been a pause, and Dante had registered it in real time, the way he registered everything in real time, the way the SEALs had trained him to read microsignals, the small hesitations and redirections that people generate when they're deciding on the spot whether to tell the truth. It wasn't deception necessarily. It was calculation. She'd been lying on a parking lot pavement with a through-and-through gunshot wound in her shoulder, and she'd still been calculating. I didn't know them. Maybe she hadn't known the men specifically, but she'd known why they were there. He was certain of that. His phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. He picked it up. "Mr. Wallace?" The voice was a woman's, low, slightly hoarse, and immediately recognizable, despite the thinness of pain medication. "I apologize for the hour." He looked at the clock on the microwave. 11:47 p.m. "Ms. Chen." He kept his voice level. "I was told you were sedated." "I told them I needed to make a phone call." A brief pause. He heard her breathing. Careful, controlled, the kind of breathing you do when moving your chest hurts. "They told me you've been released. I want you to know that I've already given the investigators a full account of what you did. Everything. They know you pulled me out of there. I appreciate that." It shouldn't be something you need to appreciate. Her voice had an edge to it, not at him, he thought, but at the situation, at whatever sequence of events had put them both in this position. "You saved my life. You put yourself in front of a gun for a stranger. And they put you in handcuffs." "Standard procedure," he said. "I don't hold it against them." Silence on the line for a moment. Then, "You're very calm about all of this." "I've had practice." He shifted in his chair. "Ms. Chen, is there something specific you're calling to tell me because it's midnight and you have a gunshot wound and I'm going to guess they're not thrilled you're on the phone?" She made a sound that might have been a small, strained laugh. "There are some things I couldn't say in front of the investigators." He waited. "You asked me in the parking lot if I knew the shooters." She paused. He heard the careful breath again. "I told you no." "You did." That was not fully accurate. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car went past on the street, its headlights sliding briefly across the wall. "I didn't know the men," Grace said. "I genuinely did not know those specific men. But I knew I had reason to believe that something like this might happen. I've known for about 3 weeks." "You told the FBI." I told the FBI about the financial corruption. I told them about the threats. Her voice dropped slightly. There are things I didn't tell the FBI, things I'm still not sure I can tell them, because the information I have, some of it points to people inside the department, and I don't know who to trust. Dante turned the glass of bourbon slowly between his palms without drinking it. Why are you telling me? Because you ran toward me. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the careful control it had held until now. Every single other person in that lot ran away. You ran toward me, and I have spent the last 6 hours in a hospital bed trying to figure out who in my professional network I can trust, and everyone I can think of. Everyone has something to gain or lose based on what I know. And then I thought about you. She paused. You have nothing to gain from any of this. You don't know me. You don't know what I know. You had every reason to walk away, and you didn't. Dante was quiet for a moment. Ms. Chen, I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm glad you're alive. He set the glass down. But I'm a contractor from Dorchester with a 9-year-old daughter. I'm not equipped to be whatever it is you're describing. I'm not asking you to do anything, she said. I needed to tell someone who wasn't already inside this, who didn't already have a position. Another pause. There's a name, one name specifically. Someone inside the department. I have documentation. If something happens to me before I can get it to the right people. Ms. Chen. I need someone to know. The kitchen was silent. Dante looked at the wall, looked at the dark window, thought about Lily asleep in her room at the end of the hall, and Max curled at the foot of her bed, and the 4 years he'd spent building something quiet and functional and safe out of the wreckage of everything that had come before. Then he thought about a woman lying on a parking lot pavement, pressing her hand against her own shoulder, still calculating even through the shock and the pain, still trying to figure out the problem, still fighting. He knew something about that. Tell me the name, he said, and Grace Chen told him. And Dante Wallace, sitting alone in his dark kitchen at midnight, with 2 fingers of bourbon going warm in a glass he hadn't touched, understood for the first time how deep this was going to go, and how completely from this moment forward his quiet life was over. The name was Carver. Deputy Superintendent Raymond Carver. 22 years on the force. 3 commendations, a photograph with the mayor on the wall of his office, and according to Grace Chen, the man who had been routing information about her cooperation with the FBI to the network she'd been helping to dismantle for the past 6 weeks. Dante sat with that name in the dark for a long time after Grace hung up. He didn't write it down. Writing things down creates evidence, and evidence in the wrong hands creates problems, and he'd learned a long time ago that the most dangerous piece of information is the one that can be traced back to the moment it was shared. He just held it in his mind, turned it over, the way you turn over a stone to see what's living underneath, and thought about what it meant and what it didn't mean, and what he was supposed to do with it now. What he was supposed to do was call Agent Marsh, give her the name, let the FBI do what the FBI does, go to bed, wake up in the morning and make Lily breakfast, and take Max for a run, and go back to being a contractor from Dorchester, who had a near-death experience on a Saturday and a good story to tell for the rest of his life. That was the intelligent move, the safe move. The move that made sense for a man with a 9-year-old daughter and a mortgage and a company with 3 employees who depended on him showing up. He picked up Marsh's card, turned it over between his fingers, set it back down. The problem was Carver. If Carver was the leak, if Carver had been feeding Grace's location and movements to the network, then Carver already knew the shooting had failed. Which meant Carver knew Grace was alive. Which meant by morning whoever Carver answered to would be making adjustments. And if Marsh's task force had Carver in its orbit without knowing what he was, then calling Marsh might as well be calling Carver directly. He thought about Grace in that hospital room, alone, sedated with a through-and-through gunshot wound and exactly as much institutional protection as a man named Carver decided to provide. He picked up his phone and called a different number. It rang 4 times before a voice came on, rough with sleep, and not particularly happy about it. "This better be good, Dante." "Tommy." He kept his voice low, moving away from the hallway where Lily slept. "I need a favor." Tommy Okafor had been Dante's teammate for 3 years in SEAL Team 4, big, meticulous, and possessed of an almost supernatural ability to find information that wasn't supposed to be findable. He'd left the Navy 2 years before Dante, and now worked private security consulting out of a brownstone in Cambridge, which was a polite way of saying he did the kind of work that organizations needed done, but didn't want attached to their names. "What kind of favor?" Tommy said. "Background on a Boston PD deputy superintendent, Raymond Carver. I need whatever's publicly accessible. Financials, property associations. Nothing illegal." A pause. "Define nothing illegal." "Nothing you'd have to explain to a judge." "That's a narrower category than you think." The sound of Tommy sitting up shifting, sleep leaving his voice and something sharper replacing it. "What happened?" Dante told him. The short version enough for context, not enough to be a liability. Tommy listened without interrupting, which was one of the things Dante had always respected about him. The man knew the difference between the information he needed and the information that was just noise. When Dante finished, Tommy was quiet for a moment. "The woman who got shot," Tommy said. "Chen Capital Group. You know her?" "I know of her. She's not small, Dante. Chen Capital has city contracts worth about $80 million in active development. If someone's been using her company's financial structures as a laundering vehicle, we're not talking about a street crew playing games. We're talking about something with deep roots." "I know. And you have a name that connects to that root." "I have a name she gave me. I have no verification. I have no documentation. But you believe her." Dante thought about Grace Chen in the parking lot. The pause, the calculation behind her eyes, even through the shock and the pain. The phone call at midnight that she'd made not because it was strategic, but because she was scared and out of options and running on instinct. "Yeah," he said. "I believe her." "Okay." Tommy's voice shifted into the register Dante recognized from prep sessions before operations, precise, forward-moving, no wasted words. "Give me 6 hours. I'll see what surfaces on Carver through legitimate channels. Property records, court filings, anything that's public. If there's a pattern, I'll find the edge of it." "I appreciate it." "Don't appreciate it yet." "Dante?" Tommy paused. "You've got Lily." "I know." "That's not a small thing to have in play when you're standing next to this kind of situation." "I know Tommy." A long pause. 6 hours, Tommy said and hung up. Dante set the phone down on the table, looked at the untouched bourbon, picked it up and drank it in one swallow, not for the taste, just for the function of it. Then he went and sat in the armchair near the front window and watched the street and let his mind work until dawn came up pale and gray over the rooftops of Dorchester. He didn't sleep, but he wasn't restless. He'd always been able to do this, the long, quiet vigil, the patient waiting better than almost anything else. It was one of the few things the military had given him that felt like a gift rather than a scar. At 5:40 a.m., his phone buzzed. Tommy's text said only, "Call me." His name shows up clean on the surface. Tommy said when Dante called. 22 years clean. Commendations, promotions, the whole picture. But 3 years ago, Raymond Carver purchased a property in Sandwich, Cape Cod, 4-bedroom waterfront, paid cash, $940,000. Dante was quiet. His salary as deputy superintendent runs about $140,000 a year. Tommy continued. He's been at that level for 4 years. Before that, lower. His wife works part-time at a dental practice. They have 2 kids in college. So the cash purchase has no documented source, no inheritance on record that I can find, no significant investment history that would generate that kind of liquid cash, no second properties previously sold. Tommy let that sit for a moment. Now, could there be an explanation I'm not seeing? Sure. Maybe he had a rich uncle. Maybe he won the lottery and never talked about it. But combined with what you've told me, the timing alone, 3 years ago, is right around when, based on what Grace Chen reportedly told the FBI, the network started scaling its operations through the real estate shell structure. Dante felt the pieces aligning in that cold, mechanical way he'd learned to trust and distrust in equal measure. The trust came from pattern recognition, the kind built over years of reading situations where the wrong conclusion meant people died. The distrust came from knowing that patterns can be manufactured, that sometimes the evidence that looks most compelling is the evidence that someone wanted you to find. This is circumstantial, Dante said. Completely. I can't give you a smoking gun through public records. What I can give you is reasonable cause to think your instincts aren't wrong. Tommy paused. The other thing I found, and this is interesting, is that Raymond Carver and your FBI, Contact Agent Marsh, have overlapping institutional history. Carver was liaison to the Boston field office for 18 months, 2020 to 2021. Joint Task Force on Trafficking. They know each other, Dante. They've worked together. The morning light was getting stronger now, coming through the window in long, flat angles. Dante could hear Max moving down the hall, the dog's internal clock as reliable as any alarm. That's not necessarily significant, Dante said. They work in the same city. No, but it means if Carver has assets inside the FBI field office, not Marsh specifically, but someone adjacent to her, someone who fed him information about Chen's cooperation, the channel was already established. Tommy's voice was careful, precise. I'm not telling you Marsh is dirty. I have zero evidence of that. I'm telling you, the network between these institutions has points of contact that make the leak you're describing operationally possible. Dante processed this. What would you do? He asked. In my position. I would find out who inside the FBI I could trust independently of the Boston field office. Tommy said it without hesitation. Not Marsh, not her supervisor who she'd report to and who'd report up a chain that potentially has Carver's fingerprints on it. Someone lateral, someone who has no Boston connection. You know anyone like that? I might. A beat. Give me another 2 hours. He gave him 2 hours. In the meantime, Lily woke up. She came out of her room at 7:15 with her hair a mess and Max at her heels, and the particular expression she wore when she'd been thinking hard about something and had decided to come at it directly instead of sideways. She got a glass of water, drank half of it, and sat down across from Dante at the kitchen table. You didn't sleep, she said. I slept a little. She looked at him with the amber brown eyes that never let him get away with anything. Dad. A little, he repeated. She accepted this with the dignity of someone choosing her battles. Then she said, the lady from the parking lot. Is she really okay? She's in the hospital. She's going to recover. He paused. How do you know it was a lady? I saw her, when you were helping her. Before the police came, I looked around the side of the doorway. I know you told me not to, but I looked. She said it straightforwardly without apology. She looked scared. She was. Were you scared? He considered this the way he always considered her direct questions seriously because she deserved serious answers, and had since she was old enough to know when she was being managed instead of spoken to. For about 2 seconds, he said. When I first heard the shots and I didn't know where you were. After that I was busy. Lily turned the water glass slowly between her palms. What happens now? What do you mean? I mean. She frowned, working something out. The police had you in that room for a long time, and you're up all night. And you have that look. What look? The one where you're deciding something and you don't want me to know you're deciding something because you don't want me to worry. She said it matter-of-factly without accusation. You've had that look since you came and got me last night. He looked at his daughter, 9 years old, braids coming loose from sleeping on them. Max's leash still wrapped once around her wrist, from the morning habit of keeping him close, and felt that specific helplessness that parenthood generates when a child sees you too clearly for comfort. "It's complicated," he said. "Things are always complicated when you say they're complicated." She met his eyes. "Is she in danger?" "The lady." He thought about lying. It would have been easy and kind, and she would have believed it long enough for him to sort out the problem. He'd done it before, in those first terrible months after her mother died, managing the information into digestible portions so that she could grieve without drowning. But she was 9 now, not 6. And she'd watched him run into gunfire yesterday and come out the other side, and she'd spent 4 hours alone in a doorway with her dog holding the world together by herself, and she deserved better than easy and kind. "I think there might be people who want to make sure she can't tell the truth about what she knows," he said carefully. "And I think the right people don't all have that information yet." Lily sat with this for a moment. "So you're going to help her?" "I'm trying to figure out the right way to help her." "Which is different." "What's the difference?" "The difference is that helping her wrong could make things worse, could make things dangerous for more people." He held her gaze. "Including us." She was quiet for a long moment. Max put his head on her knee, and she stroked his ears without looking down. "Is that why you were up all night?" she said. "Trying to figure out the right way?" "Yes." "Did you figure it out?" "I'm working on it." She nodded slowly. Then she stood up, refilled her water glass, and said, "I want pancakes. And then, I want you to stop pretending you're not going to do the right thing, and just do it." He stared at her. She looked back at him with perfect composure. "Buttermilk or regular?" he said finally. "Buttermilk." She sat back down. "And I want to know what's actually going on. Not the kid version, the real version." "Lily." "I'm the one who stood in that doorway for 4 hours, Dad." Her voice didn't waver, didn't rise. It was just clear the way clear things are when they've been stripped of everything unnecessary. "I think I've earned the real version." He looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he got up and started making pancakes. And he told her. Not everything. Not the name, not the specific details of what Tommy had found, but the shape of it. The true shape of it. A woman who knew something dangerous. People who didn't want her to tell it. A system that might have been compromised in ways that made the usual channels unreliable. Lily listened the way she always listened to the real version of things, completely without interrupting her eyes on the middle distance while her mind worked. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The people who shot her, if the police find them, that's being investigated. But if the person inside the police is helping them, the investigation might not go anywhere. That's the concern, yes. So the investigation needs to go somewhere that person can't reach it. That's the idea." She nodded, picked up her fork. "Okay, what do you need to do first?" He put the pancakes in front of her and sat down across from her, and almost said, "I need you to stay safe, and let me handle this." Which was the parent response. The protective response. The response that would have made her put her fork down and look at him with those eyes that saw right through the comfortable version of things. Instead, he said, "I'm waiting on a call. After that, I'll know more." "Okay," she said, and started eating. Then, with her mouth half full, she added, "Max needs a walk. And you should eat something. You can't think when you're running on nothing." He ate something. Tommy called back at 9:30 with a name, Special Agent Kevin Rourke, FBI Organized Crime Division out of the New York field office. No Boston connections. No overlap with Carver's institutional history. And according to Tommy, who had been 2 years ahead of Rourke at a joint federal training exercise in Quantico, a man of thorough and documented integrity. "He knows the Boston situation from the outside," Tommy said. "The OC division has been tracking the network your Grace Chen has been cooperating against for about 18 months independently. Rourke's been on the periphery of it. He knows the shape of it. Does he know about Chen's cooperation? He knows a Boston cooperator exists. He doesn't know who, because the Boston field office kept that information internally, which means he doesn't have Carver in his information chain. Correct. Tommy paused. I can get you a number. Getting him to take a call from a civilian contractor from Dorchester is going to be a different problem. Let me worry about that. Dante. Tommy's voice shifted again. I want to say this once, and then I'll leave it alone. You understand that if you hand Rourke a name even informally, even framed as a tip, you become part of this. Officially or not, you're in the architecture now. They will need you, and need has a way of not letting go. I know. And Lily, I know Tommy. He was quiet for a moment. I appreciate it. Give me the number. He had the number for 20 minutes before he used it, turning it over in his mind, the way he'd turned Marcia's card over the night before. The same question, the same consideration, the same calculation. But this time, it felt different. Because last night the question had been, what's the right move? And this morning, after Lily's eyes across the kitchen table, after her voice saying, I've earned the real version, the question had shifted. It was no longer about the right move in the abstract. It was about what kind of man he was going to be on the other side of this. He'd spent 8 years in the Navy learning to make decisions under impossible conditions. He'd spent 4 years after his wife died learning to make decisions in the quiet, impossible conditions of grief and single parenthood. Both had taught him the same lesson eventually, from different directions, that the cost of inaction is always higher than it looks when you're standing at the edge of the choice looking down. He dialed. It rang twice. Rourke? Agent Rourke. My name is Dante Wallace. I'm a civilian. You don't know me. Yesterday afternoon, I pulled a woman named Grace Chen out of a shooting on Tremont Street in Boston, and last night she gave me a name that I believe your organized crime division needs to hear through a channel that doesn't run through the Boston field office. He said it clean and straight, no preamble, no hedging. I have about 60 seconds before you decide whether to hang up. Tell me when the clock starts. A silence on the other end. Not the silence of surprise, more the silence of rapid assessment. Then Rourke said, Clock started 30 seconds ago. Keep talking. Dante talked. He laid it out in order Grace's cooperation. The shooting, the FBI contact that had been established through the Boston field office, Tommy's findings on the property purchase, and finally the name. Carver. He said it once clearly without drama. Rourke was quiet for a long moment after that. You understand what you're doing, Rourke said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And the source of the name Chen herself told you this directly. Correct. She hasn't given this to Agent Marsh. Not as of last night, no. She said she didn't know who to trust inside the Boston structure. Another silence. Dante heard papers moving, the sound of something being written. Mr. Wallace, Rourke said, I need you to sit tight for the next few hours. Don't contact Marsh. Don't contact anyone inside Boston PD. Don't contact Chen directly. His voice was measured and careful. The voice of a man managing an unexpected development with controlled efficiency. Can you do that? I can do that. Good. I'm going to need to verify some things on my end. If your information checks out, and if the property record holds under scrutiny, this becomes a federal matter above the Boston field office's operational level, which is exactly the channel your source was looking for. A pause. I need a number where I can reach you directly. Dante gave it. One more thing, Rourke said. You said you have a daughter. Yes. Is she with you? She's here. She's safe. Keep her that way. Rourke's voice dropped slightly, not warmer exactly, but more direct, less procedural. Carver has been on this force for 22 years. If what you're telling me is accurate, he has relationships and information networks that go in a lot of directions. The moment this starts moving, and it will move quickly once I make some calls, anyone whose name is attached to the initial tip becomes visible. He paused. I'm telling you this so you understand the landscape you're in." Dante looked down the hallway, toward the sound of Lily talking to Max in her room. The one-sided conversation she held with the dog every morning, telling him about her dreams and her plans for the day, with the earnest confidence of someone who knows they're being listened to, even if the listener can't respond. "I understand it," Dante said. "Good." Rourke was moving now. Dante could hear it, the sound of someone shifting into operation. "I'll be in touch within 3 hours. Stay close to your phone." Rourke hung up. Dante set the phone on the counter, stood at the kitchen window, and looked out at the street. The ordinary Sunday morning street, with its ordinary Sunday morning quiet. A neighbor walking a dog. A car pulling out of a driveway. A kid on a bike, and understood in a way that settled bone deep and final, that the ordinary Sunday morning version of his life had ended approximately 18 hours ago in a parking lot on Tremont Street. He thought about that for a moment. Then, he thought about Grace Chen in her hospital room, alone, with the weight of what she knew, and the quiet, fierce courage it had taken to make that midnight phone call to a man she had no reason to trust, except that he'd run toward her when everyone else ran away. He thought about Lily's voice saying, "I've earned the real version." He thought about his own hands pressing a makeshift bandage against a stranger's shoulder, saying, "You are not going to die today, Grace. That is a fact." He didn't regret any of it. That was the thing he realized standing at the window while the ordinary Sunday morning went about its business outside, that not for a single moment, not last night in the dark, and not this morning in the kitchen, and not now, had he wished he'd kept walking. Had he wished he'd pushed Lily into that doorway and stayed there with her, let someone else make the decision. He would do it again. He would do it the same way. Every single time. It wasn't heroism. He'd been around enough genuine heroes to know what that looked like, and it looked like people who made the calculation and decided the risk was worth it. What Dante had done in that parking lot wasn't calculation. It was just who he was. The Navy had sharpened it, given it form and discipline, but it had been there long before, put there by a father who told him that the measure of a man was not what he did when everyone was watching, but what he did when the watching was up to him. Lily came into the kitchen with Max. "Rourke called you back, didn't he?" she said. He looked at her. "How do you know about Rourke?" "You said his name when you were on the phone with Tommy. I was getting water." She picked up Max's leash off the hook by the door. "So what did he say?" "He said sit tight." "Are you going to sit tight?" Dante looked at his daughter, this 9-year-old person who had watched him sprint into gunfire, held a doorway alone for 4 hours, and eaten her pancakes with the calm pragmatism of someone who had already decided that fear was not going to be in charge, and felt something that was bigger than pride and more complicated than love, and didn't have a clean name in any language he knew. "For now," he said. She nodded, clipped the leash to Max's collar, looked back at him from the doorway. He's going to call back, and when he does, it's going to get real. It's already real, Lily. More real than... She pulled open the front door. "Come on. Max needs the walk and you need the air." He grabbed his jacket. He went. And 3 blocks from home, while Max was investigating something of great importance at the base of a parking meter, and Lily was walking slightly ahead with her face turned up to the October morning, Dante's phone went off. Not Rourke. Not Tommy. The screen read, Grace Chen. He answered it on the second ring. "Mr. Wallace?" Her voice was different from the night before. The medication was lighter, or she'd pushed through it because there was something urgent and clear underneath the pain now. "They moved me." He stopped walking. "What?" "Last night after I called you this morning 2 hours ago, a hospital administrator came to my room and told me I was being transferred to a different floor for security reasons. They said it was departmental protocol." Her breathing was controlled but tight. "The officer who was supposed to be outside my door this morning. Different officer. Different name. I didn't recognize him." Dante's eyes moved automatically, the habit, the training sweeping the street, The parked cars, the windows. Are you somewhere secure right now? I'm in my room. The door is locked. A pause. I think they know I called you. How? Because the administrator who came to tell me about the transfer, she was nervous, and she said something strange. She said, "Your situation has been escalated to Deputy Superintendent Carver's attention." Grace's voice went flat and deliberate on the name. She said it like it was reassuring, like I should be relieved. Dante turned to look at Lily, who had stopped walking and was watching him with sharp, attentive eyes. "Don't open the door for anyone you didn't call yourself," he said. "Do you have your phone charged?" "Yes." "I'm going to give you a number. Write it down." He gave her Rourke's number. "Call him in the next 10 minutes. Tell him exactly what you just told me. Use the name. Don't soften it." "Dante?" Her voice dropped. "They're going to come for me again." He was already walking, hand on Lily's shoulder, steering them back toward home, moving with the particular controlled speed that doesn't look like running, but covers ground fast. "Not if Rourke moves first," he said. "And if he doesn't." He thought about what to say, thought about reassurance and its limits, thought about what he'd said to her in the parking lot, "You are not going to die today, that is a fact," and how he'd meant it as information rather than comfort. "Then I'll come to you," he said. A silence. "You don't know me," Grace said quietly. "I know enough," Dante said. And he meant that too. He got Lily home in under 6 minutes. She didn't ask questions on the way back. She read him well enough to know this wasn't the time for questions, that whatever had shifted in his voice on that phone call was something she'd get the full version of later. And for now, the priority was movement. She kept pace with him, Max matching them both, stride for stride, and when they came through the front door, she went straight to the kitchen table and sat down with the quiet readiness of someone who has accepted that the world is currently moving faster than normal and has decided to be useful rather than afraid. Dante was already dialing Rourke before his jacket was off. Rourke picked up on the first ring. "I was about to call you," Rourke said. "Grace Chen just contacted me. They moved her room this morning. New officer on her door she doesn't recognize. And a hospital administrator told her the situation had been escalated to Carver's attention by name. Presented it as reassurance." A beat of silence that had weight to it. "When she called me 15 minutes ago, I gave her your number. She should be calling you right now." "She already did." Rourke's voice had changed. The careful procedural register from their first call was gone, replaced by something faster and more direct. "I had 3 of my people verify the property record on Carver in the last 2 hours. It holds. And we found 2 additional transactions, a boat purchase and a renovation on the Cape property, both cash, both within the last 18 months. Total exposure is somewhere north of $2 million in assets with no documentable source." He paused. "I've been on the phone with my section chief for the last 40 minutes. We're moving this to federal level. Boston field office is being kept out of the loop until we understand the full extent of the contamination." "How long does that take?" "Faster than it would have yesterday." His voice was tight and efficient. "The problem right now is Chen. If Carver knows she's alive and conscious and talking, she is at risk in that hospital. I have 2 agents en route to Massachusetts General from New York. They'll be there in under 3 hours, but 3 hours is a gap." "How big a gap?" "Big enough that I'm not comfortable with it." A pause. "Mr. Wallace, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to understand that you are under no obligation, legal or otherwise, to say yes. You are a civilian, and this is not your responsibility." Dante already knew what he was going to ask. "The hospital is 12 minutes from me," Dante said. "I can't officially request a civilian to provide security for a federal witness. What I can tell you unofficially is that Grace Chen called you before she called anyone else this morning, and that the reason she did that is worth something." Rourke let that land. "I can also tell you that the officer currently posted outside her room, I ran the name she gave me. He's real, he's on the roster, no red flags on paper. But he was assigned to her detail this morning by the overnight shift supervisor whose direct reporting chain runs through Carver's division. You think the officer is dirty. I think I can't rule it out. And I think 3 hours is a long time to leave someone alone with an unanswered question. Dante looked at Lily across the kitchen. She was watching him. She'd heard enough the tone of it, the shape of it, and she was sitting with her hands flat on the table and her eyes steady and direct, and she looked in that moment so much like her mother that it stopped his breath for half a second. I'll go, he said. You will not under any circumstances interfere with law enforcement personnel or take any action that could be characterized as threatening or obstructive. Rourke said carefully and precisely, the legal disclaimer coming fast and clean. You are going to visit a woman you helped yesterday who is recovering from a gunshot wound. That is all. Understood. My agents' names are Santos and Delgado. When they arrive and identify themselves to you, you step back and let them work. No heroics. I specialize in not doing heroics, Dante said. Everything I've heard about you in the last 3 hours suggests otherwise, Rourke said. My agents will be there by noon. Don't do anything I'll have to explain to my section chief. He hung up. Dante stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he turned to Lily. I have to go to the hospital, he said. I need you to stay here. She looked at him steadily. With Max. With Max. And with Tommy. I'm going to call him, he'll come sit with you. You don't open the door for anyone until Tommy gets here. Not the mail, not a neighbor, not anyone you didn't expect. Can you do that? She didn't flinch. Didn't argue. Yes. And if anyone calls about me or about yesterday, or about anything that doesn't feel right, you call Tommy first, and then you call me. He came to the table, sat down across from her, and made sure she was looking directly at him. Lily, I need to know you understand why I'm doing this. She was quiet for a moment. Then, because she's alone. And because the people who are supposed to be protecting her might not be. Yes. And because you already decided in the parking lot that her life was worth protecting. And deciding that once means deciding it all the way. She said it simply, not with the gravity of a child imitating adult language, but with the genuine understanding of someone who had been listening to real conversations for 9 years and had assembled the pieces into something true. He looked at his daughter and felt that complicated thing again, the pride that was bigger than pride, the love that didn't have a clean name. Yeah, he said. That's it exactly. Then go. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand once hard and brief, the way he squeezed hers. Then she let go. I'll be fine. Max is better security than half the people you know. Max lifted his head from the floor at the sound of his name. Dante called Tommy, who said he'd be there in 20 minutes, and whose voice carried the particular absence of complaint that meant he understood the severity without needing it explained. Dante waited until Tommy's car pulled up outside, watched from the window as Tommy, 6'3", built like a warehouse, carrying a paper bag that probably contained enough food to feed a small army, came up the front steps, and then he gave Lily one more look, one more moment of her steady eyes and her settled expression, and went. Massachusetts General was exactly 12 minutes away. He drove within the speed limit and thought about nothing except the layout of a hospital corridor's elevator banks, sight lines, the particular vulnerability of a room that can only be exited one way. He'd done security assessments on facilities before in a different life, and the habits came back automatically, the way all deep training does not consciously summoned, but simply present like muscle memory that never fully sleeps. He found a parking spot, walked in through the main entrance, and went to the visitor's desk. Grace Chen, he said. I'm listed as an approved visitor. Dante Wallace. The woman at the desk checked her screen, and Dante watched her face for the microsecond of hesitation that would tell him she'd been given specific instructions about his name. There was nothing. She looked up and gave him a room number and a floor and directions to the elevator, the rote efficiency of someone doing the ordinary work of an ordinary Sunday morning. He took the elevator to the 4th floor. The corridor was quiet. The Sunday morning hospital quiet that is somehow both peaceful and tense. The sound of machines and soft shoes and the low murmur of a television somewhere. He found Grace's room at the end of a corridor near the nurse's station, and he found the officer outside it. The officer was young, maybe 28, with a regulation posture and a coffee cup and the carefully neutral expression of someone who has been told to be visible and professional. His name tag read, Mallory. He looked up when Dante approached, and something in his posture changed, not a lot, not dramatically, but enough. "Sir." His voice was even. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Ms. Chen, Dante Wallace. I'm on the approved visitor list." Mallory held his eyes for a moment. "One moment." He pulled out his phone, rather than a radio, which was Dante noted a choice, and looked at something on the screen. Then he looked back up. "She didn't mention you were coming. I didn't know I was coming until an hour ago." Dante kept his voice easy, kept his hands relaxed at his sides. "I was the one who helped her yesterday. She called me this morning. I wanted to check on her." Another beat of held eye contact. "I'll let her know you're here." Mallory knocked on the door, opened it a few inches, exchanged low words with someone inside. Then he stepped back and held the door open. "5 minutes," Mallory said. Dante went in. Grace Chen looked better than she had any right to. She was propped up against the raised head of the bed with her left arm immobilized in a sling and an IV line in her right arm, and the kind of pale, stripped-down appearance that people have when they've been through something physical and are still running on the reserves. But her eyes were alert and sharp, and when Dante came in and she saw him, really saw him, registered who he was, something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly, more like the particular expression of someone who had been waiting to exhale and just found permission. "You came," she said. "I said I would." He pulled a chair to the side of her bed and sat down, positioning himself so he could see the door without making it obvious. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone put a bullet through my shoulder." She said it dryly, without self-pity. "The surgeon says the structural damage is minimal. I'll have full range of motion with physical therapy." "Good." He paused. "You called Rourke." "I called Rourke." Her voice dropped. "He told me his people are coming. He told me to sit tight and not say anything to anyone here until they arrive." She glanced toward the door, toward the general direction of Officer Mallory. "He also told me not to be alone. That's why I'm here." She looked at him for a long moment. The sharp executive composure was present, but thin. He could see beneath it to something that was working hard to hold everything together, and he respected that. The composure wasn't pretense. It was discipline. There was a difference. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Okay." "When I was lying on that pavement, and I heard you coming." She stopped. Started again. "I've been in difficult situations before. Business negotiations that went wrong. A lawsuit in 2019 that tried to take everything I'd built. I've been in rooms where people wanted to destroy me, and I had to hold my ground." She met his eyes directly. "But I have never been more frightened in my life than I was in that parking lot. And when I heard your voice when you said I've got you, I didn't trust it. My first instinct was that it was another threat." Dante said nothing. Let her talk. "It took me about 30 seconds to understand that you were actually helping. And in those 30 seconds you just kept talking, kept working. You didn't need me to trust you. You just did what needed to be done." She paused. "I'm not good at trusting people. It's a known problem. I've been told about it many times." "It's kept you alive this long," he said. "It's also kept me alone this long." She said it plainly, without apparent self-pity, just as a fact. "My company, my work, my apartment. No family close by. My parents are in Seattle. I have colleagues and professional contacts and people who want things from me." She looked at him. "Nobody who would run into a parking lot." "You don't know that." "I know my data." Something almost like a smile moved through her expression. "I've been doing actuarial calculations on human behavior since I was 12. It's a gift and a problem in roughly equal measure. He leaned forward slightly. Grace. The officer outside. Mallory. Her eyes sharpened. What about him? His assignment this morning came through Carver's divisional chain. Rourke can't verify whether that's procedural or deliberate. She processed this without visible panic. He noticed that the quality of her processing, the way she absorbed difficult information and integrated it rather than reacting to it. So he could be here to protect me, she said slowly, or he could be here to monitor me, or both. Possibly. Or he could be completely clean, and we're dealing with an administrative overlap that means nothing. Dante kept his voice quiet and even. But Rourke's people are 2 hours out, and I'm not going to assume the overlap means nothing while we wait. What do you suggest? I suggest that if anyone besides hospital medical staff or Rourke's agents tries to move you, reposition you, or change the plan for your care in the next 2 hours, you don't cooperate. You ask for identification, you ask for written authorization, and you call Rourke before you agree to anything. She looked at him steadily. And if they don't give me time to call Rourke, then you're louder and more difficult than they expect you to be, he said. You make it a public event, nurses station visitor hallway anywhere with witnesses. You make it hard to manage quietly. She held his gaze. You've done this before. Protected people in environments where the threat is unclear and the institutional structure is compromised. A few times, yeah. Afghanistan. Among other places. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me something, she said. Not about the situation. Something else. He looked at her, surprised by the shift. You have a daughter, she said. How old? 9. What's her name? Lily. Something moved through Grace's expression, something genuine and unguarded. She was there yesterday, in the doorway. She was. She stayed where you told her to. She did. He thought of Lily pressing herself against that green door with Max's bulk in front of her, holding it together for 4 hours. She handles herself. That doesn't come from nowhere, Grace said quietly. He looked at her. She was looking at him with an expression that was different from the sharp assessment she'd worn up to now, something softer underneath, something that had been standing back and had just stepped forward. Her mother, Dante said carefully. You don't have to. She died 4 years ago, ovarian cancer. Lily was 5. He said it the way he'd learned to say it straight without softening, because softening it made it harder for other people and didn't help him. She was an extraordinary person. Lily got the best of her. I'm sorry, Grace said. Not the automatic social sorry, the real one, the one that meant she'd actually registered what that cost. Thank you, he said, and meant it. They sat in the quiet of the room for a moment. The machines hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. Normal hospital sounds, the ones that are supposed to be reassuring. Then the door opened. It wasn't Mallory. It was a man in scrubs, hospital identification badge, the right shoes, the practiced ease of someone who belonged in a medical environment. Mid-40s, with an unremarkable face that Dante immediately tried to read and found deliberately unremarkable, which was its own kind of signal. He was carrying a medication tray. Ms. Chen. His voice was professional neutral. I need to update your IV line and check your shoulder dressing. Grace looked at Dante, a glance quick, barely perceptible. He kept his face still and looked at the man in scrubs. Dr. Mehta said she'd be by at noon, Grace said. Her voice was steady. She didn't mention anyone else. Dr. Mehta asked me to handle the morning rounds. She had an emergency. He was already moving toward the IV line. What's your name? Dante said. The man stopped, looked at Dante with polite professional neutrality. I'm sorry. Your name. She has a right to know who's treating her. A beat. The kind of beat that means something. Harris, the man said. James Harris. I'm a PA assigned to this floor. Great. Dante stood up from his chair, slowly without aggression. just stood up all 6 feet 1 inch and 190 pounds of him, and positioned himself between the man and Grace's IV line. She's going to need to verify that with the nurse's station before any changes to her medication. Hospital policy after a security incident. It's actually exactly what her attending physician specified, Dante said. And there was something in his voice now, not loud, not threatening, just absolutely immovable, that was a different quality from ordinary conversation. So, we're going to call the nurse's station right now, and if they confirm you and confirm the medication change and confirm Dr. Mehta's authorization, we'll get this done quickly. That work for you? The man called Harris looked at him. In Dante's experience, there are two kinds of people who encounter that particular tone of voice and that particular physical presence in a situation they weren't expecting: people who get louder and more aggressive, and people who reassess. Harris was the second kind. Dante watched him reassess. In real time, watched the calculation moving behind his eyes, watched him measure the situation against whatever outcome he'd been expecting, and find the math wrong. "I'll come back," Harris said. "Great idea," Dante said. "We'll be here." Harris left. Dante moved immediately to the door, looked both ways down the corridor, watched Harris turn left toward the elevator rather than right toward the nurse's station. He watched him go all the way to the elevator bank and press the button and wait. He watched the elevator open and Harris get in. Then he went to the nurse's station. "Excuse me." He kept his voice calm and his manner completely ordinary. "Could you confirm for me whether a PA named James Harris is assigned to this floor today? The patient in room 412 is asking." The nurse behind the station, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, looked at her computer, typed something, looked up. "We don't have anyone by that name assigned to this floor," she said, "or this wing." "I thought so." He held her eyes. "I need you to call security right now, and I need you to do it without broadcasting it over the PA. There may be an unauthorized individual in the building with possible intent to interfere with a patient in room 412. That patient is under federal witness protection. FBI agents are en route." He said it precisely and without drama. "The fastest thing you can do right now is call security and then call Dr. Mehta and get her to this floor." The nurse looked at him for one long assessing second. Then she picked up the phone. The next 40 minutes were controlled chaos, the specific kind that happens when an institution realizes it has a security problem and has to respond to it without panicking its patients or staff. Security swept the floor. Mallory, who turned out in Dante's reassessment to be genuinely clean, just poorly assigned, called it in to his direct supervisor, and was smart enough to bypass the chain that led to Carver and go directly to his watch commander with a flag that Rourke's office had quietly pre-positioned. Dr. Mehta arrived in 12 minutes, confirmed she had not sent anyone named Harris or anyone else to update Grace's medication, and had 3 colleagues verify Grace's treatment record had not been altered. Rourke called while all of this was happening. "Harris," Rourke said when Dante gave him the description. "We're running it. There are 2 individuals connected to the network who fit that profile, mid-40s medical background used in previous operations for exactly this kind of access." His voice was tight. "We've got building security looking at camera footage now." He went to the elevator, exited the floor going down. "He may still be in the building. I'd get your people here faster if you can." "Working on it." A pause. "You handled this correctly, Mr. Wallace. Everything you did was exactly within the bounds of what a concerned visitor would do." "I know. I'm noting that for the record." "Okay. And I'm noting that if you hadn't been there." Rourke stopped. Let the sentence sit unfinished, the weight of it understood by both of them. When Dante went back into the room, Grace was sitting exactly where he'd left her. She hadn't tried to get up, hadn't tried to reach the phone, hadn't done anything except sit very still in the way that people sit when they are managing themselves carefully, and the management is costing something. When he came in, she let out a long, controlled breath. The nurse's station confirmed he wasn't authorized. Dante said. She nodded. Something in her face shifted the held breath, exhaled the controlled surface, cracking just slightly at the edges, enough to let through a brief human flash of the thing underneath. Not panic, more like the aftermath of panic that's been successfully contained, the way a small tremor goes through a structure that has held under stress and is only now releasing the tension. "Okay," she said, and her voice was steady. Almost. "You're okay," Dante said. "I know." She straightened against her pillow, rebuilt the composure with the efficient practice speed of someone who has done it many times. "I know. She stopped. "I'm angry. That's what it is. Not scared. Angry." "Good," he said. "Angry is useful." "There are people in that network who have worked with my company," she said, and her voice had an edge to it now, clean and sharp, like something that's been honed. "Who sat at my conference table and had coffee and talked about development projects, and all the time they were using the financial structures my company built to launder money and fund God knows what. Violence. Operations like yesterday." She looked at the door. "And now they sent someone to my hospital room." "They're scared," Dante said. "That's what this means. If they were confident, they'd wait. This kind of move, rushed, poorly covered, this is fear." She looked at him. "You think so?" "They tried to kill you in broad daylight in a parking lot. It didn't work. Their asset inside the department knows federal attention is moving in a direction he can't fully control, and now their hospital access attempt is going to be on a security camera and in a federal file." He met her eyes. "They're running out of moves." She absorbed this, turned it over, and then slowly something settled in her face. Not ease exactly, but a kind of resolute calm. The calm of someone who has looked at the situation clearly and decided they can stand in it. "Tell me about your company," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Your construction company. You said residential renovation. Tell me about it." She saw his expression, and something that was almost a smile moved through her face. "I need 10 minutes of not thinking about any of this. 10 minutes of talking about something ordinary. Can you give me that?" He looked at her, this woman in a hospital bed with a gunshot wound and an IV and the full weight of a federal investigation pressing down on her, asking him to talk about drywall and permit processes for 10 minutes so that she could breathe, and he felt something shift quietly in his chest. Something that wasn't about the situation, wasn't about the danger or the logistics or the careful calculation of what came next. Something simpler and more complicated than any of that. "I specialize in older houses," he said. "Pre-war construction mostly. Dorchester, Roxbury, some work in Jamaica Plain. The bones on those old buildings are better than anything being built today. Solid hardwood framing, real plaster walls, radiator heat that'll outlast everyone in this hospital." He leaned back slightly in the chair. "Most people want to gut them and put in recessed lighting and open floor plans. I try to talk them out of it. Do you succeed? Maybe 40% of the time." He thought about a triple-decker in Dorchester he'd finished in the spring, the way the original chestnut staircase had looked, after 3 weeks of careful stripping and refinishing the color of it, the grain of it, the particular quality of something old being returned to itself. "But when I do, the house ends up feeling like what it was always supposed to be." "What does that feel like?" she said. "When it comes out right." He thought about it. "Like you found something that was already there," he said. "You didn't make it. You just got it back." Grace looked at him with an expression that was quiet and full, and something she wasn't trying to conceal. "I think you might be good at more than construction," she said softly. He held her gaze for a moment. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. "Santos," the message said. "In the building. Room 4, 1-2 in 5. "Rourke's people are here," he said. Grace nodded. The professional composure came back, not replacing what had just been there, but layering over it. "I know what I need to do now," she said. "I'll give them everything, the documentation, the name, all of it. She paused. You should go back to your daughter. I will. He stood up. When this is over. When this is over, she agreed, and something in the way she said it, not a completion of his sentence, but a commitment, an acknowledgement of something neither of them had fully named, stopped him for a moment. He looked at her. She looked back. Dante, she said. And it was the first time she'd used his first name without the pressure of emergency behind it. Just his name. Just the ordinary fact of it spoken plainly. Grace, he said. The door opened and two people in suits came in with FBI credentials and serious faces, and the particular energy of a situation, moving from crisis to procedure, from burning to controlled, and Dante gave them a nod and stepped back and let them work. He took the elevator down. He walked out into the October air and called Tommy and heard Lily's voice in the background asking Tommy something about whether dogs could actually tell time, and the sound of it. The ordinary, impossible sound of his daughter's voice in his own kitchen on a Sunday morning broke something open in him that he hadn't known was clenched. He stood on the sidewalk outside Massachusetts General and let himself feel it for a moment. The relief, the exhaustion, the particular weight of having done something that was going to cost him going forward in ways he couldn't yet fully see. And underneath all of it, beneath the relief and the exhaustion and the weight, something else. Something quieter and more stubborn. Something that had been planted without either of them intending it in a hospital room where a woman who had run out of people she could trust had looked at him and said his name like it was something ordinary, like it was something that had been there a long time. He got in his car. He drove home. 3 weeks later, Raymond Carver was arrested at 6:47 in the morning. Dante heard about it the way most people hear about things that have been set in motion and then handed off secondhand through Rourke in a phone call that lasted 4 minutes and covered the essential facts without ceremony. 2 agents at Carver's front door in Newton. A warrant that had taken 11 days to assemble properly because the case against him needed to be airtight, needed to be the kind of thing that couldn't be appealed apart on a procedural technicality by a well-funded defense attorney. The Cape Cod property. The boat, the $2 million gap between his documented income and his documented assets, and most critically, a series of encrypted communications that Grace's documentation had allowed the FBI to decode communications that placed Carver at the center of an information pipeline running directly from the department to the network that had ordered the shooting. The man called Harris had been identified and picked up in Providence 4 days after the hospital. He was, as Rourke had suspected, a former paramedic with a criminal record that had been carefully obscured, and he was currently cooperating with federal prosecutors in ways that were making a lot of people very uncomfortable in very high places. 3 other officers had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and the network itself, the one Grace had spent 2 years quietly documenting, the one that had threaded through city contracts and real estate vehicles, and a web of shell companies that had taken the FBI's Organized Crime Division 18 months to partially map, was, according to Rourke, not destroyed, but broken. Disrupted at its operational center. The kind of damage that takes years to rebuild, if it rebuilds at all. Dante listened to all of it standing at his kitchen counter, with his second cup of coffee going cold in his hand. When Rourke finished, there was a brief silence. "How are you doing?" Rourke asked. It was the first time in all their conversations that the man had asked him anything personal, and the directness of it, the simple human weight of it, caught Dante slightly off guard. "I'm all right," Dante said. "Your name is going to come up in the trial," Rourke said. "You know that." "I know." "Not as a defendant, not even as a primary witness. Grace's testimony and the documentation are the spine of the case. But you'll be referenced. The press will find it." "I figured." "Does that concern you?" Dante thought about it honestly. Thought about Lily, who had gone back to school the Monday after everything happened and had sat across from him at dinner that first evening and told him that Marcus had said her science project was still better than his volcano, even after she'd explained what had happened over the weekend. Thought about his crew. 3 guys who showed up at job sites every morning with thermoses of coffee and strong opinions about load-bearing walls, who had heard something had happened and had asked him directly and had then nodded and gone back to work with the particular easy loyalty of men who don't need everything explained. Thought about a hospital room and a woman saying his name like it was something ordinary. "No," he said. "It doesn't concern me." "Good." Rourke paused. "For what it's worth, Mr. Wallace, what you did was significant. Not just the parking lot. The whole chain of it. The call you made to me, the information you passed, the way you handled the hospital." Another pause shorter. "I've worked federal law enforcement for 19 years. The number of people who would have done what you did, who would have kept doing it at every step when they had clean exits and good reasons to walk away, that number is smaller than it should be." Dante was quiet for a moment. "I had a good reason not to walk away," he said. "The woman." "My daughter," Dante said. "She told me that deciding something once means deciding it all the way." Rourke was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "She sounds like someone worth protecting." "She's the best person I know," Dante said. "I told you that the first time we talked." "You did." And there was something in Rourke's voice now, something that might have been a smile in a different context on a different kind of call. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Wallace." "You too," Dante said. He set the phone down and drank his cold coffee and listened to the sound of Lily getting ready for school down the hall, the specific percussion of it, the running water and the drawer opening and the brief argument with her own hair that she had every single morning without exception, and felt the day settle around him like something real. He saw Grace for the first time outside a hospital context on a Thursday evening in early November, 3.5 weeks after the parking lot. She'd called 3 days earlier, not about the case. Rourke's office had been handling her case communications through a different channel, just to ask if he wanted to have dinner. She said it plainly, without a lot of preamble, in the same direct way she did most things. She said she had been thinking about the conversation in the hospital room, the part about old houses and finding things that were already there, and she thought they had more to say to each other that didn't have anything to do with federal investigations or corrupt police officers or parking lot shootings. He said yes. They met at a small Italian place in the South End. The kind of restaurant that doesn't appear in review lists, that runs on neighborhood loyalty and the smell of garlic bread and the particular warmth of rooms where people come back week after week, because the room itself holds something good. Grace was already there when he arrived, her left arm still in a partial sling, but her posture straight and her expression carrying the quality he'd come to recognize as simply her alert present with that layer of contained energy underneath like a current. She looked up when he came in, and something easy moved through her face. "You're on time," she said. "I'm always on time." He sat down across from her. "How's the shoulder?" "Improving. Physical therapy 3 times a week. My therapist is a sadist who claims to be helping me, and I believe her despite all evidence to the contrary." She picked up her water glass. "How's Lily?" "She wants to interview you," Dante said. Grace raised an eyebrow. "Interview me?" "Her class is doing a project on people who've overcome challenges. She's been very diplomatic about asking, which means she's actually extremely determined." Grace laughed. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh, a real one, full and genuine, and it changed her face in a way that was striking. Opened it up, made her look younger and less guarded and more like the person underneath all the competence and the armor. "She sounds terrifying," Grace said. "She is," Dante said with complete sincerity. "She gets it from her mother." Grace looked at him. The laughter settled into something quieter. "You should tell me about her," she said. "Her mother, if you want to." He thought about all the times in 4 years he'd been asked some version of that and had given the efficient version, the clean, contained summary that conveyed the necessary information without opening anything that would take time to close again. The version that protected everyone, including him. He looked at Grace across a table in a warm restaurant in November and gave her the real version. He talked for a long time. He told her about Maya, about who she had been before the diagnosis, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make the room better without doing anything specific, the way she laughed at her own jokes before she got to the punchline, the way she'd been the one who found Max as a puppy and brought him home without asking because she knew Dante would say yes and she just didn't want to wait. He told her about the 2 years of treatment and the hope that kept rebuilding itself and the way hope does that even when the evidence says it probably shouldn't. He told her about the morning Lily had climbed into his lap 4 years ago, 6 years old and impossibly brave, and said, "Daddy, I think Mama is done being sick now," which was the most precise and devastating piece of understanding he had ever witnessed in another human being. He told her about the 4 years of finding out how to be a parent alone. The practical parts, the impossible logistics, the school schedules, the dog that turned out to be the best grief counselor either of them could have afforded. The other parts, the nights when Lily asked questions he didn't have answers for, not because he didn't know the information, but because some things don't have answers that help, and finding a way to sit in that with a child without collapsing it into false comfort or drowning her in the weight of the real. Grace listened to all of it without interrupting, without filling the silences with reflexive kindness. She just listened fully and attentively, the way people listen, when they understand that the act of listening is itself the thing being asked for. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She built something extraordinary in you." He looked at her. "Maya," Grace said, "I don't mean she made you who you are. I mean what you have, the way you move through things that didn't come from the military alone. That came from being loved by someone who saw you clearly." She held his gaze. "That's rare." He sat with that for a moment. Let it be true without deflecting it. "She would have had opinions about all of this," he said. "About you, about the whole situation. She had opinions about everything." "Were they usually right?" 70% of the time, he said. "The other 30% she was wrong, but so confidently that it took a while to notice." Grace smiled. "I respect that." They talked for 2.5 hours. About her, her parents, who had immigrated from Guangzhou in the 80s, her mother, who still called every Sunday, and was currently under the impression that Grace had fallen down some stairs because the alternative explanation was not one she was ready to have over the phone. About how she'd built Chen Capital from a 2-person consulting firm into a company that managed over 400 million in assets, and about the particular loneliness of building something significant and having almost no one in your life who knew you before you became the thing you built. About what it had been like to realize that the company she'd built had been used partially unknowingly, but used as part of a system that hurt people. The particular quality of that betrayal, the way it had made her feel responsible for harm she hadn't caused but couldn't entirely separate herself from. "That's why you cooperated with the FBI," Dante said. "Not just because you were scared." "No." She looked at the table briefly, then back up. "Because I built something and it got used for something it was never supposed to be. And the only way to clean that is to look at it directly and not flinch." She paused. "Flinching was never really an option for me. My therapist says that's a trauma response. I say it's a personality." "Can't it be both?" She looked at him with those sharp, assessing eyes. "It can absolutely be both," she said. They left the restaurant at 9:30 and stood on the sidewalk in the November cold, and Boston was doing its late fall thing, the air with a clean bite to it, the streets carrying that particular evening energy of a city that's decided to keep going despite the cold. Dante had parked 2 blocks north, and Grace's car was going the other direction, and they stood at the corner in the specific suspended moment that exists at the end of an evening that has been more than expected. "The interview," Grace said. "Tell Lily I'd be honored." He looked at her. "She'll take that very seriously." "Good. She should." Grace adjusted the sling slightly with her free hand, a small movement, an unconscious habit she'd probably developed in the last 3 weeks. "I want to meet her properly, Not as the woman from the parking lot, just as someone you know. She already knows who you are, Dante said. What has she decided about me? He thought about the morning after he'd come back from the hospital, when Lily had listened to his account of the Harris situation with her characteristic focused attention, and then said without preamble, "She sounds like someone who knows how to be in trouble without falling apart. I like that." 9 years old and already making assessments that his therapist wouldn't have managed until a third session. "She thinks you're someone who knows how to be in trouble without falling apart," he said. Something crossed Grace's face, warm and private and unguarded. "That might be the best thing anyone's said about me in years." "She means everything she says," Dante said. "It's a known issue." Grace laughed again, and then she looked at him directly the way she looked at everything directly, without the social softening that most people apply to moments like this one. "Dante," she said. "Grace," he said. "I'm glad you ran," she said, "into the parking lot. I'm glad you were the one." He looked at her for a long moment in the November cold. This woman who had been shot and survived and had held herself together through things that would have broken a lot of people, and had made a midnight phone call to a stranger because she'd run out of anyone else, and it had turned out to be the right call, and felt that thing again. The thing without a clean name, the thing that was quieter and more stubborn than any of the easier feelings. "So am I," he said. She nodded once, the decisive small nod she made when something was settled. Then she turned and walked toward her car, and he watched her go, and then he walked the 2 blocks north to his own car, and drove home to Dorchester. Lily was still awake. She was supposed to be asleep. It was 10 o'clock on a school night, and that was the rule, had been the rule for 4 years, and she followed it with approximately the consistency of someone who respected the theory of rules while maintaining philosophical flexibility about their application. She was in the armchair by the window, with Max's head in her lap, and a book open, but clearly unread. And when Dante came in, she looked up with the particular alert expression of someone who has been waiting, and is too proud to admit how hard they've been waiting. "How was it?" she said. He hung up his jacket, sat down on the couch across from her. "Good." "How good?" "Very good." She studied him with those eyes, processed what she saw. And then slowly, she smiled. Not the wide, easy grin that she deployed for good pizza and excellent test scores, but the other one, the quieter one, the one that looked like Maya. "Good," she said, like something had been confirmed. "Go to sleep, Lily." "I'm almost asleep." "You're reading." "It's a very boring book." She marked her page and closed it. "Did you tell her about the interview?" "I told her. She said she'd be honored." Lily looked pleased. "She said honored?" "Exact word." "Okay." She stood up, shifted Max gently off her lap, tucked the book under her arm. "I like her already." "I know," Dante said. "You decided that 3 weeks ago." "I decide things quickly. It's efficient." She came over and kissed him on the cheek in the efficient way she had fast, definite, and gone before it could be made into a moment, and padded down the hall to her room. Max followed her. Dante sat in the quiet of his living room in the house in Dorchester that he'd spent 3 years renovating, one room at a time, the chestnut floors he'd refinished himself, the plaster walls he'd restored, instead of replacing all the bones of the thing, brought back to what they'd always been meant to be, and listened to. The house settled around him in the November night. He thought about what Grace had said at dinner. "She built something extraordinary in you." He turned it over. Let it be true. Let it sit beside the grief of it, beside the ongoing daily fact of absence, beside the 4 years of building a life that was smaller than the one he'd imagined, and also somehow more real. He thought about a parking lot, and a flat, ugly sound, and a woman lying on the pavement who was still calculating even through the pain. He thought about a 9-year-old in a green doorway, holding her dog and herself together, waiting. He thought about the name Carver spoken in the dark, and a midnight decision made at a kitchen table, and Rourke's voice saying, "The number of people who would have done what you did is smaller than it should be." He thought about old houses, and what it meant to find something that was already there. He turned off the light. The case against Raymond Carver and the network he'd served for 3 years would go to trial in the spring and would result in 11 convictions. Grace Chen would testify for 4 days, clear-voiced and unshakable, and the documentation she'd preserved would become the evidentiary spine of a federal prosecution that dismantled the largest municipal corruption network in Boston's history in 20 years. The story would be covered by every major outlet, and Dante's name would appear in most of them, and his phone would ring for 2 weeks straight with people he barely knew, and reporters he'd never met, and once a book agent who he hung up on inside of 30 seconds. None of that was tonight. Tonight there was a house in Dorchester, and a dog at the end of a hallway, and a daughter sleeping with the uncomplicated confidence of someone who has decided that the world is difficult and manageable in roughly equal measure and has made her peace with both. And a man who had run towards something when everyone else ran away, not because he was fearless, not because he was trained, not because he'd done the calculation and decided the odds were acceptable, but because he was exactly who he was, completely and without apology, and who he was did not know how to leave someone bleeding on the ground. That was the thing. That was all of it really when you stripped away the federal investigations and the corrupt officers and the midnight phone calls and the hospital rooms and the names spoken on a November sidewalk like something that had been true for longer than either of them had known. Dante Wallace had run toward a stranger in a parking lot because there was no version of himself that didn't. And everything after that, every hard thing, every costly thing, every complicated and exhausting and ultimately irreducible thing had followed from that single, total, unambiguous act of being who he was. Some men spend their whole lives wondering what they're made of. Dante Wallace already knew.